I'm on green and I'm on green. All right. Good evening. Thanks for joining us in room or joining us on Grassroots or WebEx. This is a call to order for the Aspen City Council regular meeting of March 8th, 2022. Could we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Here.
Here.
Councilor Mesereau.
Present.
Councilor Richards.
Here.
Mayor Tory.
Here. We're going to start this evening. We don't have any scheduled public appearances, but we do have a proclamation that I'd like to read on behalf of the City Council. And then we have a couple of guests in our audience that are also going to speak for a moment. Normally I like to stand for these, but because of the microphones, I'm going to stay seated and make sure everybody can hear this. This is a proclamation of the City of Aspen, Colorado, incorporated 1881. Whereas the City of Aspen stands in unwavering solidarity with the people of the sovereign nation of Ukraine as they defend themselves against Russia's unprovoked invasion and war against their democracy and sovereign right to exist as an independent nation. And whereas the City of Aspen stands with other countries, private corporations, religious leaders, states, and cities from around the world in condemning this horrific act of aggression by Russia and demands the immediate cessation of all hostilities. And whereas in these moments of crisis, the leadership demonstrated by President Zelensky, members of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the citizens of Ukraine are a beacon of resolve and commitment to democratic principles and values. And whereas the public servants at the local level in Ukraine should be recognized as they continue to practice servant leadership under the most dangerous of conditions to provide essential municipal services. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Mayor and City Council of the City of Aspen that 1, we are condemning the act of Russian aggression. We support the government and people of the sovereign nation of Ukraine, and we urge the Aspen community to contribute resources to aid the people of Ukraine. This day, March 8th, 2022.
Very good.
Thank you, council members. We do have Dr. John Prunskis is here with us. He is the Honorable Consul of Lithuania, and there is indeed a Lithuanian consulate here in Aspen, Colorado. So I'm going to invite Dr. John up to the table, if you will. And it looks like there's a green light already on, but yep, right there is perfect. And a few words from Dr. John Prunskis.
Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the council. Thanks very much also to Mayor Pro Tem Ward Houndstein, who attended our Lithuanian Independence Day celebration the other day and brought the proclamation of the City of Aspen recognizing the independence of Lithuania. Very briefly, the only other time I had the privilege of speaking before you was when the consulate of Lithuania was opened in Aspen. And Mick Ireland was the mayor at that time, and the first question was you know, how would you have a diplomatic mission in Aspen from Lithuania, and why is that? Very briefly, the then ambassador to the United States of Lithuania was a skier, and he recognized the importance of Aspen. And as Mayor Pro Tem Ward Houndstein pointed out to me, Aspen punches above its weight. Is that right? I think you said something like that. And the ambassador to the United States from Lithuania recognized that because of the people that are in Aspen, both full-time and visitors, that this would be a great place to open up a Lithuanian consulate, and that's how that happened. Hillary Clinton was then the Secretary of State, and whenever a city gets its first consulate, the Secretary of State has to approve that. And so I'm told that Hillary Clinton's first reaction was, wait a minute, Lithuania, Aspen, what is this? But there are people, I don't know Hillary personally, but there are people who know both Hillary and me, and they said, we think this is a good idea, he's the right guy, and that's how it started. So that's just a brief history of how this occurred. So with Ukraine now, Lithuania for centuries has been an ally of Ukraine. And as you may know, Lithuania is in NATO, and Lithuania has been the principal mouthpiece for Ukraine whenever issues came up, because as you know, Ukraine is unfortunately not in NATO, and that's creating some of the problems, not even in the EU. And so Lithuania And now, Mayor Tory, such a fantastic proclamation. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, that was amazing. And Lithuania and now Aspen stand in solidarity against the actions of war criminal Putin. Other than the proclamation, I don't know, what can Aspen do? People ask me, what can Aspen do? I don't know. I know that other cities throughout the world now are getting investments from people who have, shall we say, shady wealth accumulated in Russia, and they're taking action against such investments. And I don't know if that's something that is to be considered here, or if you guys have that authority. But I have in the audience with me Paul Marks, who is a resident of Aspen, and his wife, Anna. Anna is Ukrainian. And I asked Anna if she would say a few words, especially because they're planning a Solidarity with Ukraine rally this Saturday at 4:30 in Pepke Park, which Paul will mention more. But Anna, you have to understand, Anna's mother is in Ukraine, too sick to travel, and since now the targets are civilian targets, Anna did not, thought she might not be able to say a few words. She also has additional family in Ukraine that minute to minute she doesn't know if they're going to get bombed. Paul Marks, who I'm introducing now, has written 2 letters to the editor that have appeared in both Aspen papers with a .com website of a reputable aid and relief organization in Ukraine. Unfortunately, as we know, whenever there's tragedy, there are sometimes fly-by-night, dishonest people who are trying to solicit your funds. But Paul has the contacts, and they're in the letters to the editor that appeared, I believe, yesterday, the day before, in the 2 papers of Aspen. So for those of you who are interested in contributing to Ukraine, Paul can tell you more about that. I want to thank you again. I know you guys are very busy, but what you've done today is going to go well beyond the borders of Aspen, Colorado, and the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the council here in Aspen, to the mayor, the city staff, and the council people. In what John has basically asked me to talk about briefly is just that it was just an idea that we thought if we could help anyway is to provide an opportunity for Aspen residents and people of the Roaring Fork Valley to speak and to join and to hope for the best for the country of Ukraine. So we thought of the idea of organizing a rally that would be called We Stand with Ukraine. We thank the council as well as the mayor for offering Pepke Park for this location, and we ask all to attend. It will be at 4:30 p.m. on Saturday the 12th. Please wear your colors of blue and yellow if you so choose, and we hope that we can get a nice attendance, and we ask that you spread the word. I will be seeking to promote this through local papers and through Facebook pages and whatever resources we can find, and we would hope to have a nice turnout. So I just want to again thank you for allowing us the time to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Marks.
Paul. Thank you.
Council members, I'm going to open it up for any comments. This is an international issue of concern to a lot of people. So if there's anybody that wants to make a comment, I welcome it at this time. Ward?
Yeah, my heart goes out to people in Ukraine for what they're going through and the courage that they've shown. I mentioned at John's party on Sunday that I was at the Aspen Institute Thursday night. It was tied up all day, and it was the day of the invasion. And I said, has there been resistance? Are the Ukrainian people resisting? And I think there's a resounding yes. So all of us, I think in the whole world, are inspired by the courage that the people in Ukraine are showing now.
Thanks, Ward. Any comments, Rachel?
I'd like to thank you for inviting the council, and I'd like to apologize for not being able to attend on Sunday. I had a number of unexpected, yes, I will. I had a number of unexpected things come up, but I can't speak more eloquently than Ward, and I want to thank you for representing the council, and thank you for being here today. And my heart and my prayers are with your people.
John, any comments?
I think we all stand with the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
What John said.
Right on. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and we'll see you this weekend.
Thank you.
That'll bring us on our agenda to citizens' comments and petitions. This is an opportunity for citizens to address council on issues not scheduled for public hearing on our agenda. We do ask that you limit your comments to about 3 minutes for an equal opportunity for everybody to speak. Are there members of the public that are in room that wish to speak this evening? Seeing none, I'm going to look to WebEx. If there's members of the public that are joining us on WebEx, there's still an opportunity to comment. You can unmute yourself and introduce yourself for the record. Not seeing any, I'm going to go ahead and bring it back to council table, and we'll move on our agenda to special orders of the day, council members and mayor's comments. Council members' comments this evening. I'll look the other direction and start down on this end of the table if I could.
I guess I'd just like to share my personal disappointment in the way the Gorsuch House thing has turned out. That's all I have to say. Sorry.
Thanks, John. Skippy?
Yeah, on the other note, I think I, like many of us, have just struggled the last few years with the changing dynamics in our town, the impacts of COVID and the rest of it. And I really haven't had the opportunity to get out and see another ski resort in a while. And I got to go to Big Sky this weekend and got some great skiing. That mountain's awesome. But it really, as it always does when I leave, gave me perspective and appreciation for how much we have. I found myself sort of in my studio bemoaning things like loss of a sense of community feel, deterioration of culture, and, for better or worse, to go somewhere else is really a reminder of how much of it we really do have, how blessed we are, and how much we have to work with in terms of history, human and financial capital to make sure this is the best damn mountain town anywhere in the world. So I'm feeling a little rejuvenated and thankful for Big Sky for the skiing.
Thanks, Skippy. Ward?
I also felt a sense of betrayal by what went down with the transfer of ownership of the Gorsuch House. I don't know anything other than what you can read in the paper about the Russian developer that purchased it. I don't think there's anything that this council can do other than express our feelings on that transfer. I have no idea where the money comes from, and it's really not, there's no power that we have as a city council to do anything about it. Like Skippy, I got some skiing in this weekend. I went up for 2.5 hours in Hunter Creek.
Nice. Love that place.
Yeah. Got some skinning in where I do mountain biking and running, and hiking in the summertime, and nobody had been up there all winter long, so it was an adventure. Yeah, that's, I think all of our hearts go out for Ukraine, and the feeling of, I don't know the word, I don't have the words for it. It's just horrible what Putin is doing, and evidently his propaganda receives quite a bit of support in Russia, and those that don't support it wind up in jail. So.
We're dead.
Or dead, yeah.
Thanks, Ward. Rachel, comments tonight?
Yeah, I certainly agree and second all the comments that have been made. Looking at what happened with the Gorsuch proposal is really very sad, and I don't know that the price is at all commensurate with the potential pro forma of that hotel, should it ever be built. But it's, you know, a nice, safe place to park money. And I'm very disappointed by the people who told our community this was about locals doing local things. Now, I would remind myself and all of us that there are community benefits, and there's reasons why the community did choose to vote for that, you know, really to the redevelopment of that area. And there are no changes that come with the purchase price in terms of the land use approval. So we'll be taking a very careful view to that. You know, I think we've all just been stunned by what's happened in Ukraine, and the thought of the first war in Europe since World War II, the first major war, excuse me, in terms of a country as large as Ukraine. And I think that when you start hearing nuclear weapons being rattled around and attacks on nuclear power generation plants, it's a very, very dangerous time for the country and for everyone. And I also take exception with those who kind of have been supporting Russia from the United States and from our media and from Tucker Carlson, and acting as if that's a great country to live in. And as I understand it, the wages for a surgeon tend to be around $400 a month, and the wages for policemen and military tend to be around $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And so your average citizens are living in, even with great skill and great demanding jobs, at a very low level. But the military and the police who are enforcing this sort of dictatorship operate at a very high level. So it's a very awkward thing to see. And I think the type of funding that we've seen with the kleptocrats and the oligarchs, it's unfortunately finding a great parallel in the United States when you have major corporations and individuals who pay less taxes as a percentage of their income than grocery store workers. And so it's really sad to see that I think those same sort of things are happening in our country. Of might makes right, and money controls everything, and we're certainly seeing that pernicious effect within our community on many levels as well. Other than that, I can just say go skiers and show those Denver boys something on Thursday morning. Thank you.
Right on. A couple comments from me this evening. I'll start with the Ukrainian crisis. One thing that people could do is actually use this as an opportunity to consume less foreign supplied oil and energy resources, a lot coming from Russia. So use this as another opportunity to remind yourself to limit maybe your driving trips, consolidate trips, and drive a lot less. That is one small thing that can have great impacts on not just the war in Ukraine, but global environment as well. As for Gorsuch House, I have one idea for Gorsuch investors that just cashed in to the tune of some $65 million, perhaps returning some of the community's $4.3 million of taxpayer money that was put up as part of the development proposal would be a great nod to the community that they've been heard. Of course, this is shared development rights by the ordinance that was passed in the city and by the voters. So maybe just even, 2 point something, I think, from Gorsuch would be great. I want to make a mention about mental health. I want to keep it in the forefront of our thinking that we are continually dealing with mental health as an issue in our community. These days have been very difficult and interesting on a lot of levels, and sometimes you just need to reach out for somebody to talk to. Of course, the Aspen Hope Center at 925-5858 is one avenue, and then for greater resources and greater lists of resources, aspenstrong.org is a place that you can find out of some of the great offerings and resources that are in our community. And then, as always, I like to point out things that are more fun to do than being here at our meeting. Tonight is no different. Tonight is Aspen History 101 is going on at the Wheeler Opera House. It does start at 5:30, so if you pack up your stuff and start walking out now, you might be able to make it. 5:30 is the Aspen History 101, sponsored by the Aspen Historical Society, and then and that's a free show, but also a free showing of Aspen Extreme at 7:30 tonight. Chris.
Best movie ever made. It won the Oscar for that.
It won the Oscar for that.
Actually a comedy.
What's that?
It's actually a comedy.
Feels like a documentary to me.
I don't know. When I watch it, I laugh.
Well, I'm glad we're enjoying it even right here. So this just proves it. 7:30 at the Wheeler Opera House, Aspen Extreme is playing. Get on over there in lieu of being here with us at this meeting. Those are my comments tonight. I do not see agenda amendments this evening. And city manager's comments. No city manager comments tonight. Board reports, just for the public's understanding, we've moved in-depth board reports to one of our work sessions on a monthly basis, but this is an opportunity for council members to share some of the boards that they have been attending meetings of or are going to. Are there any board reports this evening? John, I'll start with you.
Well, as you know, you and I went down to the CAST meeting, Colorado Association of Ski Towns. I'm not going to bore you with everything we listened to, but the more interesting parts I thought were House Bill 22 and Affordable Housing Tax Credit, which continues and expands the state affordable housing tax. I think that's up in the next session. There's also an extended producer responsibility law that's going to be introduced in the middle of this month, and it requires certain producers, say Coca-Cola, has to chip into a fund to help recycle the waste that they produce, the recyclable materials that they produce. I think it's a step in the right direction, and there are 2 states that already have them in place, Maine and Oregon. And then just one more thing. We were part of a program put on by the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Industry Office, and told that the outdoor recreation economy in the United States generates $788 billion a year. That's more than the auto industry at $787 billion a year, and the pharmaceutical industry at $485 billion a year. And the reason this was brought up just is to prove that how much money is involved in getting people outfitted that can come to our state and visit and spend money. And that's the direction a lot of our communities will be going as they transition away from other industries such as coal. That's it for CAST.
Can I ask you to add one thing on it? You shared a story about some of the meetings and encounters you had at the dinner reception. That's that evening. The meeting is a CAST legislative update, so we get a kind of an update on what's going on down at the Capitol and about CAST position on stuff. But John, there's also an opportunity to mix with other elected officials. And John, you had if you don't mind, if you just share that.
No, not at all. Philip from our Comm Dev department handed out these flyers that they had printed up that explain what our moratorium is about and what we're trying to address and so on, and how people can get involved. So I took about half of them and actually handed them out to other elected officials at the cast meeting, and there was great enthusiasm for these. They were all, even people that seemed kind of negative at first, the more I showed it to them and they started reading it, the more interested they became and said, I'm taking this back to my council and sharing it with them. Some remarks were, your comm dev department put this together? And the mayor of Breckenridge told me that, thanked us for taking the lead on, for imposing the moratorium and taking the lead and showing other communities what leadership looks like. I thanked him.
Very nice.
Thanks, John. Other board reports?
You go ahead on housing. I got a rude eye if you
Got
want.
it. Yeah, so APCHA housing meeting, we continued our conversation around right sizing, which series of incentive programs to get the most use out of our existing affordable housing stock. That first looked like the approval of a resolution that just clearly stated that this is a voluntary program. This is not about, moving anyone who doesn't want to move. It's about creating incentives that would benefit people and would also benefit our community. That's sort of a new approach for APCHA to memorialize something like that. And it was a good opportunity for clarity, checking in with each board member to make sure that that is exactly what we plan. So that felt really good. We then moved on into what does that program look like, and we're moving in the direction of a pilot program. We'll be coming back to this board here, as well as the county commissioners and some other groups, but looking at a right-sizing pilot with a small number of units in Burlingame 3 to see if new stock is something that might be a proper incentive, and then a limited number of units in the remainder of the affordable housing stock to let people sort of vote with their actions and tell us what things are interesting to them, whether that's a unit that allows a dog, a unit that has more proximity to town, a unit on the first floor if they have ADA issues, et cetera. So it's exciting to see that moving forward. We also talked about senior housing and the board making a recommendation of some kind that decision-making bodies should start looking at that as well as we move forward and become a three generation community as we all hope to be, are. So yeah, that's the update. It felt like really good progress on an important issue and just demonstrates the seriousness of the board of tackling this forthcoming challenge.
Thanks, Gibby.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to spend a little time to talk about the Rude-Eye Water and Power Authority retreat that was held just last month, I think, as the month has turned around so quickly, and mostly to talk about the issues that it's facing. Rude-Eye Water and Power Authority was kind of created by the state as an entity when the dam was built as part of the whole Frying Pan, Arkansas project, and the water diversions over towards the Pueblo part of the country, part of the state. And Rude-Eye Water and Power Authority doesn't have a real funding source other than its membership dues. And if you go back far enough, it actually didn't even have membership dues, and its activities were just funded by the hydropower. And when Amy Marjoram was our city manager, she kind of identified that as being a bit of a fatal flaw, and we set up a policy. And because it is a regional entity that really watches for water issues on the West Slope and our valley, our watershed particularly, all the members agreed to put in $6,000 each. But that is a very, very limited budget, and I don't think it's changed in quite a while. It may have gone up a little teeny bit recently, but it doesn't produce the revenues to support the great many activities that it's both charged with by the original formation documents, as well as the work that the individual members would like to see it do going forward. And so there's times when the retreat was really focused on how do we cure the budget shortfall, the structural deficit. So these are some of the types of things that they're required to do. coordinating the Roaring Fork watershed plan and its implementation, being a voice in the Basin Roundtable and Colorado water process, protecting Root-I Reservoir from invasive species, conducting educational tours, leading the regional water efficiency plan, influencing Root-I Reservoir releases to take into account the impact of the releases on local communities, the fishing and the frying pan, developing consensus among its neighborhood entities, and securing fundings for projects to benefit one or more entities. And they're doing that, and they're doing pretty well. But April is the part-time coordinator for Root-I Water and Power Authority. And when we looked at the budget and the administration costs and these sort of things, I think she's able to give it about 8 hours a week or something like that. So it's really not sufficient. And so I just wanted to bring this to the board's attention. The retreat had a few ideas, more about how are we really getting the appropriate administrative fee for managing some projects that come forward for others, including the inspection at Root-I. One of the things that I had noted, and we'd have to consider, and I really want Sarah to take a hard look, working with April about some of the budget issues and where it can go from here. But there's some entities that clearly have less interest in Root-I, but participate for some of the greater regional aspects. But a town like Carbondale doesn't have the same, perhaps, stake in it as they do in the Crystal River, but they do within the watershed. So it gets real hard to say, well, can everyone's dues go up to 10,000 each? And what's it based on? You know, the income of the city, the size of the property tax base, who knows what? But we don't really know that maybe a recalculated dues formula. And also, we were talking about perhaps the hydro should have a membership as well as a city council, as a city person. But these are just the larger challenges facing it, because they have all these actions they're supposed to be in charge of doing or watching and helping with. And at this point, we really don't have the resources for all that the agency is charged with. And April's doing a great job with it and organizing it. And there's been some really cool projects that, because it's a well-recognized entity and it's a well-respected entity, such as doing a new LiDAR flyover during the winter to be able to understand how deep the snowpack actually is or isn't, and things like this to really get a much better sense of the mid-altitude range snowpack, as opposed to the snowtells that are all just kind of measuring the very highest up. So that's about all I wanted to just put it on the table. It's similar to CORE. You end up with an agency that has a lot of expectations placed on it and work that needs to be done, and yet not really the resources within the agency for all that it could or should do. And I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Any questions?
All of my meetings are really in the future. This Friday, CORE have a governance committee meeting. Next Thursday is a full board meeting. Sister Cities is tomorrow night. RAFTA is Thursday. And CCLC is next Wednesday. So a lot of meetings coming up. And I did want to mention just that John Prinska's wife is the chair of Sister Cities in Chicago. Chicago has 29 sister cities.
Ooh.
Wow. And we have 7. For a small community, 7 is pretty healthy.
Thanks, Board. Board reports for myself. As John was saying, I attended the CAS legislative update last week in Denver. Last Tuesday, we had a CAS housing task force workshop. The only thing to really report out of there is that a lot of us have been talking about short-term rentals and maybe a different tax classification as businesses and such. Highly unlikely is where we've gotten to with that. The complications that are brought up by state leaders is just beyond what they think that they can tackle through something like that. And, you know, without going into it, just ownership, usage, classification as it relates beyond just whether it's being used for short-term rentals or not, when it would be, when it would not be, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, we were all kind of a little bit hopeful on that front.
You know, just a kind of random thought, but there's been some really tough issues the state has dealt with before, and when it doesn't seem like any good legislation is going to be forthcoming or whatever, they'll authorize a task force to meet once the legislation is out of session to try to at least wrap their arms around the problem and define it clearly and see if there's something that can be done. There's been a sales tax simplification task force going on off and on for a while. And the one I particularly remember was the task force about agricultural tax property status for places that were really second homes or not really true agriculture. And they met and things like that, and they eventually came up with some legislation that they could forward. So, you know, maybe if Cass took a different approach at this point in the legislature session and said, hey, can we get a study group authorized by the state to be able to try to come, that might be an approach.
Okay, great. I'll take that back to the group.
It keeps it alive.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then on the others, yes, this is a busy week. Wheeler Opera House Advisory Board tomorrow at 3. RAFTA starts the day on Thursday, and Board of Health on Thursday as well for me. That'll bring us down to our consent calendar. The consent calendar tonight consists of resolution number 24, REMP funding for CORE, resolution number 31, professional services contract with RRC Associates for the residential generation study, resolution 33 and 34 regarding the Pepke Transit Hub construction contracts, resolution 27, Valley COVID Lab lease agreement, and the draft minutes of February 22nd, 2022. Are there any items that members care to have discussion about and pulled from the consent agenda?
I'd like to pull for discussion Reso 24.
Thank you. Resolution 24. And I think that'd be the only one that's requested this time. So why don't we have a quick conversation about REMP funding for CORE?
Introduce John Doherty, that's the interim executive director of CORE.
Hey, John.
All right. Well, good evening, Council. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I was here last time sitting next to this lovely lady who has been a tremendous partner, I will say that, in the short time that I've been with CORE. As was said, I'm the interim executive director there. This evening, what we have before you is just the resolution number 24, reflecting an effort on the part of CORE and at the request of the city to really articulate more clearly exactly what we intend to use the REMP dollars for. CORE as an organization is going through a pretty substantial shift in the way we're looking at the work we do. The best way to put it is that we're doubling down on the work that CORE needs to do around climate action and really starting to look more broadly at how we can be a better and more robust partner to all of the constituencies who are supporting the work of CORE and the urgent climate matters that are facing the region. So these dollars really speak to 4 focus areas that you'll see CORE working on over the next year. So a lot of the effort has been around getting clearly defined goals for the organization. One of those is really in partnership with APSHA. So we've been getting to know the new APSHA director quite well. He's doing a fantastic job. We have been out touring property with him to talk about how we can focus our efforts with making incentives and grants available to that community as a priority area within the Pitkin County restrictions. The other areas that we're really focused on right now are looking at Coal Basin, which is an initiative in the region that we'll be directing some of the REMP resources towards and exploring that further. But really just wanted to thank Council for their support. I've only been with the organization the past 6 months. We will be announcing a search in pretty short order for the permanent executive leader. But over the last 27 years, it really has been remarkable to see everything that REMP has accomplished across the region. A couple of highlights as part of our transformation, and I believe this was part of the resolution last year in terms of updates, is to really look at ways to increase alternative funding sources for the organization. So just this week, we have made offers and we will begin implementing both a grant consultant as well as a fundraising and development consultant that will be working with the organization to really expand and diversify funding streams to complement what we really need to see REMP dollars as, which is a restricted set of funding to support the mission work of CORE. We are also looking at more of a fee-for-service model so that in the end, we would sort of have a trifecta of grant funding, philanthropic support, and fee-for-service to allow us to reach not only the communities served under REMP, but those well beyond that. One of the things that I am learning a great deal about is that there are no bounds to carbon. So it doesn't see the limits of jurisdictions, and we need to increase our efforts on the part of CORE to reach beyond those bounds, focusing REMP dollars within Pitkin County, and then looking for other funding sources to help us continue to have an impact on the region. So just want to thank you for the opportunity. Glad to answer any questions that you may have. But this resolution speaks to dollars that were approved in the past, and we will be delivering quarterly reports to the Climate Action Office going forward around our deliverables against the goals and the use of those dollars.
Thank you, John. Council, any questions?
No questions. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a brief mention that the coal basin is a methane capture. The amount of methane and greenhouse gas is a dangerous greenhouse gas, and that CORE is focused on trying to capture that methane, and it can be a project that can be replicated across the country. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is great. Reading through it, I was really excited by this year's work. CORE's kind of in its like amphibious stage of evolution. Started out as a sea creature, and it's learning to breathe a new fuel. And it was just awesome to see that work is proceeding expeditiously, intentionally, but that the core functionality and benefit to the community and the world is not being dropped during that. And so that was just really exciting to see, and I appreciate your leadership in that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
This is where you move to adopt the consent calendar.
Just about.
With that, if there's a motion for the consent calendar.
Yeah, actually, I just want to make a comment before motion. I want to take the moment to thank our design team for the Petit Transit Hub coming to fruition this year. It's something that I think is really a great safety improvement. I've been coming down Main Street nice and slow sometimes and just see other people blowing right by those pedestrians. And I think that safety island is going to make a huge difference. And I took a lot of work to kind of figure out how we can afford it in this sort of high inflation environment for construction costs. But I'm really happy to see us moving that forward today and for our community. So thank you to everyone in engineering. Appreciate it.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Yeah, I'll dovetail a little bit there. You know, it's exciting for me as well because that line really delineates where we're getting into our core and getting into what we've all been asking for so long is greater pedestrian safety. So it's definitely going to be a big step forward, and you're absolutely right. The work it took to get that in front of us and stay with that project took a little extra effort. So thank you guys very much.
A little extra dough, too.
Yeah.
Right?
From core to core.
I would make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for the consent calendar in total?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes, ma'am.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Thank you. No notice of call-ups this evening brings us to first reading of ordinances. First reading tonight is ordinance number 4, Series 2022. This is 700 Ute Avenue, or the Aspen Alps Building 100. Plan development, minor amendments to a project review approval. Good evening, guys.
Hello.
Come on up. This is first reading, council, so this is an opportunity to get questions answered and any requests you have for the public hearing and second reading. So we will take, in a bit, we'll take a motion for reading and a motion for approval if we get to that.
Gentlemen, please make sure that the green light is on the microphone and that you need to speak into the microphone as close as you see me demonstrating right now to allow those in the interwebs to be able to clearly hear you tonight.
interwebs.
Thank you.
It's a series of tubes, very effective.
Good evening. Is there staff this evening? Great.
Yes, sir. This is Jeffrey Barnhill. Good evening, council members, Mayor Tory. I did have a brief presentation. I know this is first reading, so I will keep it very brief if I can share my screen.
Please do.
This excellent microphone efficacy, by the way.
All right, as Mayor Tory mentioned, this is for 700 Ute Avenue, Aspen Alps Building 100. This is first reading. And the project is for a minor plan development amendment to a project review approval. Here is the aerial photo of Aspen Alps 100 building. As you can see, it's bounded by South Original Street to the east, South Spring Street to the west, and to the south Ute Avenue, which is closed to vehicular traffic. And the W Hotel is located adjacent to it to the north. A little bit of background on this one. Construction began in 1962 with the 100 building for Aspen Alps. It's a 73 multifamily residential units spread through 7 condo buildings. It's had a couple of ordinances since it became a PD. Ordinance number 28, series of 2001, approved the PD. The last ordinance, number 34, series of 2013, set dimensions for the buildings, but it did fail to address some key as-built sections of the site. For instance, the pool and hot tub area were not considered in the 2013 PD amendment. That is due to some new regulations that came in 2015. And the rear stairs and the deck of Building 100 were not addressed as encroachments with the 2013 PD amendment. So the scope of the project is to reinforce the 100 building with steel frame around the entire building, the required exterior renovations for the structural upgrades, reconfiguration of the pool and spa area, removal and replacement of all exterior finishes, new hardscape and new landscaping. The requests from the applicant are amended setbacks, amended height, memorialization of mechanical equipment locations on the roof, and eliminations of the requirements found in the section that talk about hot tubs and pools not allowed in street-facing yards, and a variance for the pool mechanical equipment room. The dimensional requirements proposed are in this slide here. 5 feet for the front yard setback, 5 feet for the east side yard setback, a 0-foot setback as measured from the easement, which is 12 feet from the lot line for the west side yard, a 0-foot setback measured from the easement 13 feet 10 inches from the lot line for the rear yard setback, and then a maximum height of 30 feet 9 inches. And that is required for building code requirements. And going through each of the requests, that you can see in the proposed setbacks that this will include the rear stairs and the deck that weren't addressed in the 2013 PD amendment. The height measurement is due to a technicality for how we measure height. There's one section of the building where the basement is exposed wall area. So we measure from finished grade. Here's showing where the mechanical equipment locations will be. The pool mechanical room, the red rectangle, is located partially in the right-of-way, but the applicants do have a encroachment license for that building, but they'll need a variance to memorialize that location. And for the pool and spa between a structure, They're hoping, since this has been an existing condition for so long, that we will allow them to do work on the pool and spa, which would require us to get rid of those requirements. Here's the existing pool area site plan. Here's the proposed pool area site plan.
Can you go back?
Yep. And as you can see in this one, it's not very accessible, ADA accessible for anyone. And in the proposed pool area, ADA accessibility and connectivity will be greatly improved. Here's the proposed again. And staff recommends that City Council approve ordinance number 4, series of 2022 on first reading and set the date for second reading and the public hearing for April 12th, 2022. And I am more than happy to take any questions. And as you can see, I have the applicants here as well, so we can answer any questions.
Questions of staff at this time?
Is the applicant and the city in agreement on all of this?
Staff does support this project. We do have a structural engineer letter that is being reviewed by the building department to ensure that the height increase is necessary for building code compliance.
Okay,
And we have no issues to raise with the staff recommendations or
okay,
the
great,
conditions. So yes, we are in agreement with the city on this.
great, thank you.
John?
Just a quick question. It's not clear from the plans, but the former Maurice's restaurant, is that still a restaurant space? Has that been converted into spa space?
It's a conference room now. It hasn't been Maurice's since I think sometime in the 70s, but I'm not sure.
Early 80s for sure.
80s, okay.
But at any rate, yeah, I was just aware that there was a space there and wondering what it was now, and I couldn't tell from the plans.
Yeah, it's really where, meetings and support activities for the Alps goes on. And as was mentioned, today there is no ADA-type access down there. There's stairs between Ute Avenue and that portion of the building. So not only can disabled people not get down to the pool, but they can't get into the conference room if there were some function that they needed to be there for. So that's one of the improvements that this is really aimed to resolve for this building.
Understood. It used to be very much more highly used than it is now.
Yeah.
The pool as well.
I was just going to say, I think that picture where you showed the difference of measuring it at grade or by the pool, that was the old entrance into the Maurice's. It was down lower, so. And I did find one of his cookbooks at the thrift shop, which was quite a score.
I have a couple old pictures of Maurice that are in the conference room. I'll bring one next time.
Yeah, there you go. So about how much is the increase in FAR? Because there's some more going on the roof.
Bless you.
The increase, I have that in the packets. I can't find it currently, but I believe it is around 400 square feet, but that is within their allowable dimensions.
Okay.
And we stay within there's no variance requested in terms of floor area. Most of the floor area increase happens because we're cladding the building with new materials and new exterior, and Louise could explain this better than me, but the way the city code measures floor area, you have to take into account the new.
Cladding.
So rooms are not getting bigger, units are not getting bigger. We're not adding any unit count here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is
so
not a
it's-
growth kind of a project. This is a clear restoration, rehabilitation of a 60-year-old building.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
John, does the conference room still smell like garlic?
No.
For second reading, I'm going to be interested in just some comments about neighborhood impacts, neighbor impacts. That's both during construction as well as some of the change in dimension. That's the only request I have at this time, though.
Would you accept a motion for first reading? Oh, sorry. We'll do it afterwards, sorry.
I will accept that motion, but I do have a question.
Oh, yeah, and one other thing.
In the existing site plan sketch that you showed at the end, it shows, kind of trees and foliage and all that. In the new site plan for the pool, it does not show any of that. Is that because none is planned or because it's simply not shown in the new rendering?
You want to take it, Luis, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I share my screen again?
I would love that.
This is Luis Menendez, the project architect.
Hey, Luis.
A little closer to the microphone for that, Alan.
Right, so the proposed site plan doesn't show the vegetation because there's a separate landscape plan that depicts that.
I would like to understand that better for the next reading. Background reason is just I find that area to be a very pleasant area of town where you have a good transition from the mountain and nature into town. It's wooded and all that, and this reads like the sort of sterility and urban environment is encroaching, and that transition is no longer there. So
We've been working very close with Parks Department, and yes, there are some trees that will get removed, but yes, we're doing some on-site replacement as well, so.
just something I want to see.
We're
next
happy
time.
to share that at second reading.
Thank you.
There's another rendering that has a different overlay on it. John?
Yeah, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you trying to attain building IQ guidelines. If I'm not mistaken, that's what I read in here.
Can you repeat that, please?
That the reconfiguration of the building, the making it, bringing it up to current code and trying to adhere to our newer building IQ standards is greatly appreciated. It just you'll be one of the first buildings to do this, and it shows that other buildings can have it done.
It's referring to the energy efficiency building code updates.
Those guys that were up there last.
All right. Does the applicant have anything that they feel compelled to add at this time? No. All right. Then yes.
I'd like to approve on first reading. Or, excuse me, I'd like to have a reading. Excuse
Yes,
me.
thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion for reading and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for reading an ordinance?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Please, yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Ordinance number 4, series of 2022, an ordinance of the City of Aspen City Council granting a minor plan development amendment to the project review approval for the property located at 700 Ute Avenue, legally described as Lot 1, Aspen Alps PD subdivision.
Thank you.
I move we approve ordinance 20, or, was it 4? Ordinance 4 on first reading.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Could we have a roll call vote for approval of ordinance number 4 on first reading?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
See.
Counselor Richards.
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you in April.
See y'all soon.
See you next month. My first visit to the new building.
Yeah.
I'm across the street. My
You've
first
been
building.
noticeably absent.
How has it been?
You missed,
I'm back, Alan.
you missed the cupcakes at the grand opening.
Well, you have to bring the cupcakes in April.
There you go.
Fair enough.
Let's have that stricken from the record, please.
I've taken a note. Posted it to Twitter.
That'll bring us down to public hearings. Just so the public and council knows, it's only a little after 6, so we do not have a scheduled break for quite a bit. We'll get through as much as we can. Resolution 29, Series 2022. This is the Aspen Mini Storage Annexation due to Colorado Revised Statutes requirements. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. For the record, Ben Anderson, planner with Community Development. One thing before we get started on any further discussion, there was an error in the resolution, kind of a Scrivener's error as I was putting forward several resolutions. And in the middle of the first page of the resolution, I referred to City Council as the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that would need to be corrected. The rest of the resolution is correct, but I did want to make note that we will be changing that should this be approved. As I talked to you previously about this item, there are a couple of actions that are required for the annexation process related to the mini storage property that will eventually be assembled for the Lumberyard Affordable Housing Project. The first couple of steps in the process are required by Colorado state statutes. And when an annexation is carried forward, there's a petition that's required and a draft annexation map that gets presented. And Colorado state statutes want to make sure that when communities are engaged in an annexation process, that everybody is very clearly aware of what's transpiring and that the petition process is compliant with a set of standards at the state level. If this is approved this evening, the next step in your process will be our more typical land use ordinance process with a first and second reading that would actually approve the annexation and approve the eventual kind of initial zoning for the property. The step this evening in Resolution 29 simply shows that the petition to annex, the draft annexation map are substantially in compliance with Colorado state statute requirements, and also that we've appropriately noticed through kind of a little bit different notice process than we typically do, required 4 postings in the newspaper that this was happening. We've done that. We sent certified mailings to Pickens County Board of County Commissioners, the county attorney, and Aspen Unified School District, and then all the other special districts that this property is subject to. So it really, I don't want to say that it's a cursory review. I think for a larger annexation piece of land, there's some other requirements that sort of come into the mix at this point in the process. But because of the size of this annexation, the issues involved, the fact that we're going to be sort of keeping things as is until we go through a much more significant land use process with the eventual lumberyard project. This is a fairly cursory review, but is required by state law, and staff is recommending approval this evening.
Thanks,
Happy
Ben.
to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yeah.
What's the next step from here?
So with approval this evening, on March 22nd, will be first reading for 2 ordinances. One will approve annexation under City of Aspen annexation kind of review criteria and also some other requirements in the municipal code. And then a second ordinance that evening that'll establish the initial zoning for the property to keep it in a holding pattern until we land on the final design and the land assemblage that's going to be necessary for the lumberyard plan development.
Thank you.
Yep. And that, the second reading for that, which will be a public hearing, is currently contemplated for April 12th.
Thank you.
I move to approve Resolution Number 29, Series of 2022.
Second.
No?
Public hearing this evening on this item, Jim?
Yes.
Never mind. We'll wait.
This being a public hearing, resolution number 29, the mini storage annexation requirements. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak this evening on resolution number 29? Seeing none in room, I'm wondering if there's any members on WebEx. Not seeing any at this time. We'll bring it back to council table then.
Mulligan to Mr. Doyle.
Let me try this again. I move to approve Resolution Number 29, Series of 2022, the Aspen Mini Storage Annexation.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote for resolution number 29, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes,
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Thanks, Ben.
thank you, Ben.
This will bring us down to action items. Our first action item for consideration this evening is resolution number 28. This is a request to pay fee in lieu in meeting affordable housing mitigation requirements. Ben Anderson is joining us this evening.
Yes, again, thank you, Mayor Tory and Council. Ben Anderson, Planner with Community Development. The Affordable Housing Credits Program has been around for more than a decade. And in that time, and I can get into some of the details with you, but in that time, we have not had a request to City Council to pay fee in lieu since the Affordable Housing Credit's been put in place. And the reason why this is significant is that one of the things that really guarantees the value and the functioning of the market for affordable housing credits is that we make these credits the primary way in which affordable housing mitigation has been provided within the city. And for the last decade, that's been the case. The credits program has been successful. We produced more than 100 FTEs of housing units without City of Aspen intervention through the private sector. But due to some things that are going on in the marketplace that are very recent changes, we have small residential projects that have mitigation requirements that as they go out into the market right now for affordable housing credits to purchase and extinguish on their building permits, there is not an availability of credits. Now, that's not to say that there aren't credits out there that are unextinguished, meaning that they're out there, but they're in the hands of folks that have them in anticipation of extinguishment on projects that are coming forward. And so we have projects that are in the pipeline, some with approvals, some in the planning stages that we hope that we're going to have an eventual resolution of this issue. But right now, we have projects that are by right development projects that have gone through the permit review process that have fractional mitigation requirements, generally less than an FTE, that the code allows for a request to City Council to pay fee in lieu. It requires first a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission before we come to you. Planning and Zoning Commission heard the same request a couple weeks ago and by a 5-0 vote kind of recommended this resolution and this process that we've put together. Because it is a fairly significant process to ask you to pay fee in lieu, they've got to go to P&Z first, then come to you. Because of the nature of the market right now, we think that there's going to be a number of these requests for the near term anyway. And rather than try to find time on both your agenda calendar and Planning and Zoning Commission, staff came up with this process to try to batch some of these requests into a single request. There are 4 in this request. We anticipate to do this quarterly based on permits that are sort of very near issuance that need to mitigate. And so this is the process that we've put together. Applicants give us a very short land use application. They explain to us the efforts that they've made out in the credits market to try to acquire credits, and they pay for 1 hour of staff time to get into this process. So it's a little bit of an amendment to our typical land use application process, but we feel that it's a reasonable response to the current conditions in the marketplace. We also, and I think this is a very important part of this process that we put together, once the credits market improves and we've got kind of the free flow of credits again, this process that we've put together is going to be very easy to pull back on. We gave some thoughts to some code changes that we could make to try to accommodate this, but we think that this is a process that accommodates the realities in the credits market right now without undermining the larger system and putting some things in place that might translate into some things that we don't want to see. So we are recommending approval of this resolution this evening. This is, tangentially related to a lot of things that we're talking around in the development sphere right now. So I'd be happy to answer any questions from you this evening on how this is working or how it's related to anything else that we're talking about as a community right now. But this is a fairly straightforward response to something that's allowed by code that we think is necessary under the current circumstances.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Ben, and the memo. I looked through that. I'm wondering a couple of things. One is that doing accessory dwelling units is no longer allowed by our code. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's because when folks were doing accessory dwelling units as their mitigation, they were not necessarily ever having anyone live in them. And that being single-family free market home sites, the government really did not have an ability to say you have to put someone in that ADU now that you've built it.
That's correct.
Those are correct. And that should someone with a remaining ADU choose to use it to house someone, they can charge whatever rate they would like. Is that correct? It's not income capped?
I believe that's correct. If someone wanted to rent one of them, I do know that there's a requirement in most of the deed restrictions for the ADU that they have to be qualified by APSHA as a local working resident.
As a local working resident. But I just am recalling past history when there could be ADUs, but someone say, hey, it's $2,500 a month, which is a bargain now, but then nobody wanted to take it, and so it would stay vacant for years. And that's part of why the city chose not to have an ADU alternative. We also certainly saw examples of ADUs being turned into wine rooms or television rooms, or again, not their intended use. So that has kind of pushed it to this alternative, buying a credit, getting someone housed somewhere else, and or these fractional ones which are too small.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that, there's some other alternatives that are out there, but they're practically difficult. And because these are projects that require just a fraction of an FTE, requiring someone to go out and deed restrict an entire, buy-down unit, and that's a difficult proposition these days for reasons we previously discussed. But some of the alternatives that are out there are difficult or infeasible, or I think would be an undue burden.
Okay, and I'm almost finished here, but these are kind of remnant FTEs. There's not as if there was a 1.73 and they got a unit for the one and they just want a fee in lieu for the 0.73.
So the 4 projects that are included in this resolution, 3 of them are for building permits for residential development and redevelopment. And the numbers that are there are calculations based on the square footage that's involved in their project. And so it came through our typical mitigation calculation that we do for residential development. Mm-hmm. The 4th project is, and we've talked about this topic related to a code amendment that's currently on the table of City Council that's part of our moratorium discussion. But we do have in the past and still do allow for a deferral of mitigation requirements for local residents. And one of these asks this evening is for a property that had one of these deferral agreements from a previous project, and again are trying to resolve that deferral agreement and went out into the market to try to find credits to resolve that, and are similar, facing similar conditions to the kind of new projects that are under building permit, but a kind of a similar situation. But
Okay. No, I'm trying to get a good grip on this because I just using them randomly separate from what project they are, put together a 0.73 and a 0.29, which equals a 1.02 actual whole person. And, that would bring us about $385,000 payment in lieu, just adding up what's on our sheets here.
Yeah.
And I'm really kind of wondering, is that really commensurate with being able to build a unit? I mean, and that's not your germane per se, but are these the newer mitigation rates that they're being charged that we looked at in the end of 2021?
These are based on the fee in lieu, the most recent fee in lieu numbers that we have most recently updated. Back in sort of mid-2021.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The way that we get to the FTE requirements, those fractional FTE requirements, are based on the 2015 residential generation study that we've done and what's currently in the land use code. Again, this is related to a lot of the topics that
Yes.
we're discussing as part of the moratorium, and, you know,
But we have adjusted the mitigation number, we just potentially haven't adjusted the actual employment generation number, but this is where we're at today.
this is based on current land use code at the time that these folks submitted.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions, I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Ben, I had a question. One of these is to extinguish a deferred mitigation.
That's correct.
And if this person were to decide to sell their property without extinguishing that, and they sold it to a working resident, they're still eligible for deferred mitigation?
That's correct.
Okay. But in this instance, they've chosen to extinguish it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
How long do you estimate this program will need to be in place?
Again, we have some projects that are in the pipeline, projects that have land use approvals, projects that we've had, you know, pre-application meetings for that folks are thinking about doing some credit program projects. It's a little unclear to staff in terms of, and this is part of the uncertainty around the credits program, and I think something, you know, that I think as we're talking about how to boost that program and make that program more attractive to everybody who's involved with it. There's a little bit of uncertainty of once those projects are done, what's going to be the end user of those credits. And some of those projects, you know, kind of anecdotally, we know they're connected with some commercial and lodge projects that are in the works. You know, I will say that it's these sort of smaller fractional amounts. You know, with previous affordable housing credit projects that have been done, it's one of the things I think is uncertain for the private sector developers that are doing it, in that, you know, for these smaller fractions, let's say you pull 10 credits off of your project after building some units. If you're selling 0.26 and 0.73 at a time, the kind of the runoff for how long it takes to sort of gain that revenue back for your project that you're completed is a little uncertain. And so, you know, some of the projects that have been done recently, you know, I think it was some of the decision-making by the people who built the units was, you know, I'm going to go out and sell them to somebody who I can get in larger chunks, sell them and get a more immediate stream of revenue, rather than wait for these smaller residential projects to sort of come online and there be demand for it. So I think that's some of what we're seeing. I will also say that there were, you know, folks that have development projects in the works. You know, sitting in our spreadsheet that we keep track of these things, there's you know, a number of projects that kind of anticipated what their mitigation requirements were going to be, and they went out in the marketplace when there were some available and bought fractions. So we've got a number of unextinguished little small fractions, but again, kind of dedicated to sort of projects that are planned, kind of in the works and that kind of thing. So I hope that answered your question, but I do think the nature of these smaller kind of fractional pieces of an FTE for the folks that are developing projects, unless you're okay with having that sort of runoff, it does, I think, impact the revenue stream that you have coming into your project by having, you know, sometimes maybe take years to have enough of these residential projects to kind of sell off the credits that you have in hand.
So you think indefinitely?
It's going to be a bit.
Yeah.
In spite of having some projects sort of in the works. And so I would say that we're in this for at least the next year.
Okay. It's nice to know that if things change and we don't like it, we can pull back easily.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I have another question. I think the memo mentioned that a developer owns 40 credits. And
not a single developer, but there's probably about 40. There's just over 40 unextinguished credits.
okay,
Out in the marketplace, and I would say 35 or 36 of them are in the hands of a small number of people.
okay, and where I'm going with this, to buy a housing credit, do you have to have a mitigation that you have to meet, Or is this a new form of investment that those 40 housing credits could be on the open market?
It's a market. I guess I would answer it that way. I mean, I do think that, and I say that a little bit flippantly, but I do think that as we think about how to improve the credits market and make it a more attractive proposition for folks, I do think that questions around this are going to be some questions that we have to address if we're going to make the program more robust and more sustainable long-term. Because some of these questions, you know, and we've had lots of discussions kind of internally, some with council about how to make some improvements to that, but I do think that it's if we're going to have long-term sustainability of the program, there's some things that we need to make improvements to.
Mayor Tory, sorry, Ben, I wasn't sure if we were going to end up having a policy conversation.
Is that red or green?
Excuse me. Philip Supino, Community Development Director. I wasn't sure if we were going to end up having a policy conversation around some of this tonight or not. So I appreciate the opportunity to jump in here. And I think in terms of understanding the relationship between this discussion tonight and the credits market and the fact that it is a market, it's critical to think about supply and demand in a few different ways. It's not just the availability of credits and the demand for credits. It's a little more nuanced than that insofar as credits have to come from a physical space in town, a place where affordable housing could be developed for credits. And the demand is coming from other lots in town where there is demand for affordable housing to mitigate for development activities. And as we think about whether or not the credits market can truly function as our primary means of providing mitigation for some of these smaller projects, it's important to think about the relationship of that to different land uses in town. Where can you build affordable housing? At what density? And how many credits can that produce relative to the demand created by residential, duplex, single-family, and multifamily development? And so again, to put it more succinctly, there's a land relationship here, not just a credit buyer and seller relationship that's important for us to think about. Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, just a follow-up comment, and I was thinking of it before you even jumped up here, Philip, but, you know, we have talked a little in prior work sessions about creating an ability for the city to buy housing credits as well, because it's been very frustrating, I think, for people to see buildings closed that used to be rented, and they're sitting there for a number of years not housing anybody because they're now going to be a credit project when they're eventually rebuilt. And who knows when that's going to happen. So I do think that the city being able to buy housing credits would certainly allow others to look at a viable pro forma, knowing there's more buyers at one time potentially, as well as perhaps create some competition for those. But I also have to ask that, I'm just the only one asking, that our community development department look at, should the city be able to sell housing credits from some of the 300 units we're beginning to look at building at the lumberyard. I realize that a fee in lieu will go into the housing fund, but on the other hand, I really am not sure the fee in lieu we're charging is what is commensurate with the building of a unit. And so I think that that is something that we should take a look at as we're examining that to strengthen it. I realize it might have bad effects on the market, but I want to know the pros and cons. And the other is that I think we should certainly look at the credits expiring if they're not under construction and built within a certain period of time. It's like issuing a credit for someone on a mirage until we actually see the old building deconstructed and the new buildings constructed and someone turning a key. And I just, I think we need to create a little more impetus for the actual construction of those housing credit projects to start. And that if people are buying a mirage, we're losing residents during the meantime, it's a loss for all of us. It's not a positive program. So I really want to see something about how do credits expire, or that the credits are in the future conditioned upon construction beginning within a certain time period. But it's not something that I want to see city lots that could hold viable housing tied up for a decade or more until the developers, the small group of developers, decide that they've decided to use them and actually house community workers. Thank you. And I think it's a little bit like the TDR program. It's clearly a market.
It is, and
And so people can invest and hope it goes up or down.
it is a market in which the city does not currently intervene. And part of our assessment, I think, at the staff level the last few months has been that, at least presently, and there may be some lag time here, demand is not creating a sufficient motivator for folks to intervene on the supply side. And that's where we are. And
Yeah.
we see often in commodities markets, government or other agencies choosing to intervene in order to make sure that there's some parity between supply and demand
Yeah.
over time.
But
And we don't know if we're there yet, but your comments are well received. Thank you.
I agree with that, and again, that's part of why, for me, it's like these things should expire if they're not used in a very rapid sequence within our community. It's an accommodation to people rather than on-site. I personally don't want to see any fee in lieu on commercial developments of any sort unless it's this teeny fraction we just can't fit in there. But, you know, I look at a lot of this and I think these could be housed on site. But again, with the questions I used at the beginning, I know that you would not actually be able to house someone in those. So I will accept it as mitigation, but I not on any sort of commercial level. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. In Rachel's comments, she had somewhat of a request for some information moving forward and such. I guess I'll just do a quick check with council members. Some of the things that were just said, are you supportive of at least exploring those ideas and letting staff know that we hear some of the suggestions, and as we move forward in those conversations that we'll hear more about that?
So
Thank you.
the request I heard was about a selling credits, and that was the only one I
Yeah,
heard.
to look at the pros and cons of city being able to sell credits, and it's a little opposite of just taking fee in lieu and pouring it into a project, but I think there may be some merit to looking at it on both sides, especially if the supply side is detrimental right now. I mean, another alternative, I suppose our council could say, but I'm not sure if it's legal, is that if you can't buy a credit, you can't mitigate, you can't build, you know, and that would not be a realistic thing in the marketplace. The other thing I'm looking at, Skippy, is that I think credits should expire, or there should be a requirement that construction begin on the credits within a certain period of time when the building permit is, or the site plan is approved.
Well, so I have questions. So having it built sooner, I think
Yeah.
would be
I'm just
great.
asking them to explore it. I don't have any answers. I'm not advocating one way or the other.
But
So-
if you're asking me to support them spending staff time looking at it, I want to understand what you're asking. So my question is, on the delivering things quicker, I think, yeah, of course, we would all want that. They have the entitlement, which they can either build or lose. But the question I have is, you know, they don't get the credit until it's built, correct?
Correct. Until CO.
Right. So
Currently.
what want to change?
Currently.
But what I understand, Skippy, is that the housing credit program, the project, and I'm really thinking of the one up on Midland,
Yeah, I
has
know
been
exactly what you're
purchased,
thinking.
has been purchased.
Right.
And yeah, they can pick up the credits once they build the project, and they won't build that project until they build the thing that needs the mitigating. And so it could just both sit there for 10 years and neither one do anything.
I understand.
And so I'm asking them if there's ways that we could condition the approvals differently than the traditional 3-year vesting on something that is submitted for the credit program, that they want to be a housing credit program. They want specific conditions from the city and specific allowances. Maybe one of those allowances is that construction needs to begin within 18 months or some activity, rather than just being able to bank them and make housing credits an investment opportunity. The people who bought Midland for one amount of money 2.5, 3 years ago could probably sell it for 4 times as much money and not house another single employee 10 years from now.
Shorten the vesting period is what you're saying.
I'd like them to just look at the overall complexities of the program and come back with some pros and cons for us about how we need to change it. I thought that was one of the things that we're attempting in our policy work at this time. That's all.
Got it. And then the selling the credit. I guess that's the first time I've heard anyone say that. So can you kind of explain the thinking on that, what it would do?
Well, right now, this fee in lieu, should it be accepted, will go into the city's housing fund so that we can then use it to try to build the lumberyard. And what I'm suggesting is there a way, or would it be valuable for the city to be able to sell housing credits from a project like that to help finance it and to get it built sooner? And what would be the pros and cons? And the con I would be most concerned with is, would you then be taking private sector developers out and they'd have no interest, or they wouldn't have enough buyers to make their projects viable? But otherwise, it's just like you're washing the money in this way or you're washing the money in that way, and it all goes to the same purpose. I'd be interested in that,
Yeah,
understanding it,
I think we've gotten away from the
the
res-
ordinance itself.
Yeah, we've gotten away from the reso, but I brought this up a number of years ago about the city being able to buy housing credits.
Yeah, which we've all talked about.
Yeah, and I think that I'm interested in pursuing that as a policy. I think we've also phased the return on investment. It used to be all at one time. So I think what I want to do is encourage the housing credits program, and we can assure that if the city is in the market, we can assure that they're going to be sold, and we can accelerate the return on investment. So in the future for policy discussion on this, I certainly support this, but it's really, it's a diversion from the.
Thanks. Yes, I was just
Yeah.
wanting to make sure that things that are commented are heard. That's all. Skippy, do you?
I have a handful of questions, but Rachel, I appreciate, brand new ideas, so I'm just trying to understand, and, at some point I want to look at everything that could possibly make the situation around housing better, but I share these concerns about you have a lot on your plate. We've kind of prioritized what the biggest hitters are, and so I just want to stay focused on that and not get distracted and then circle back as appropriate. I guess the first question is just, so there's, I think you said 36 to 40 credits out there being held. There's money at the door, and these individuals who hold the credits are waiting for these larger projects. And so I'm trying to understand why you would do that. You can't put that capital to work if it's held up in the credit, and so it would seem that either there's an expectation that that credit will be worth significantly more, outpacing the other investment opportunities before then, or there's some belief that if that project needs 20 credits, unless they can supply all of them, that they will not be interested in buying any of them. Is that a correct read?
I think so. I mean, I think it's complicated, and I think it's specific to each kind of project and folks. I will say that there are all projects that I think we know about, that we are in the pipeline in some way. I don't think that there's something that's 20 years down the road. I think there are things that we all know about and have expectations that they're coming online, at some point in the next couple of years. But I think what you describe is probably correct, that they're getting a portion of the credits that they need, and they're finding other ways that they're going to be sort of providing mitigation. They're working sort of in the interim to, maybe bring some additional units online through other mechanisms. And so I think it's, I don't want to speculate on what folks are doing, but I do think that what you describe is generally how we understand the situation, that there's projects that are out there that have approvals, and people are trying to figure out the best way to meet their mitigation requirements.
Got it. And the reason I'm just asking is kind of projecting out to a future when we have more demand for credits from the work that we're doing during the moratorium and afterwards. Is this an ongoing structural problem of fractionalization of credit, or is it simply that that fractionalization is so small relative to these other chunks, and just trying to understand if this is going to be a problem forever or if this is hopefully a shorter term problem.
And while we're having this discussion, I want to stay focused on the question, the resolution that's in front of us. Your last question, I could definitely see a connection of how you're valuing this and evaluating the resolution that's in front of us. But I don't want to get this conversation too far off into policy direction and policy discussion on a larger question that staff is doing work on.
Well, totally fair. The nexus for me is a couple things. We don't want to take FIL, right? Fee and lieu, we've said that.
If this is an important, if your line of questioning is important to your decision-making on the resolution, then you don't have to explain it to me. You can continue asking your questions. I just want to stay focused.
It is. So do you think that that's?
Yeah, I think it's, I think when the credit program came online, I think that there were developers that had a pro forma in mind and an expectation about when they were going to be recouping the revenue from the sale of credits. And they were fine with kind of smaller fractions being sold over time and recouping that revenue. And I think that there's been a change recently in how people are thinking that have projects that have approvals that have larger mitigation requirements. And, I do think it is something to think about as we think about, and certainly we know that the credits program is a focus of moratorium work and following. We've had those clear conversations with council, and we're going to be, we've all the things that have been talked about tonight are on our minds. But I do think that the mitigation requirements for a big project are fundamentally different than one-off residential projects, and there might be some thinking that needs to happen around what that means in the marketplace for those smaller mitigation requirements on smaller projects. So it's certainly something that we're thinking about how to best sort of think about that.
Yeah. And whatever process, whether it's at the council table, at staff, at P&Z, what happens if we just say no?
We would be concerned about some technical and legal issues around our affordable housing mitigation program.
Okay.
It is important to provide people with a predictable, clear, nexus-based off-ramp to meet their mitigation requirements, and that's why we're sitting in front of you tonight.
Right, because we're demonstrating that these rules are there to address impacts to the community. They're not there as a break to development, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand that. And then I think you kind of answered this for John, but we do have this other work going on to make this program work better. And I'm just going to make it specific so that we're on the same page. But we're looking at increasing mitigation rates through GMQS to create sort of more demand in that area. We're looking at underlying zoning allowances so that someone developing AH as a credits program can do so for a smaller dollar amount per unit at the end of the day. And so these things we ultimately hope will make this program more interesting. What I heard you say is that, if all goes well, we can sort of expect some of those positive outcomes to be complete in a year or less. Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay, all right. Thank you for all of that. I guess, fee and lieu as little as possible, so this gives me a lot of pause, but I think we have to protect the integrity of the system. The one concern that I raise is this is just an ongoing, right? I mean, this is written to let you guys do this forever, more or less.
Until the need resides.
Right.
So that we're clear on that, though, that is to batch fee and lieu
Batching,
applications and bring them to council for consideration like we're doing tonight.
You will be bringing them back each time.
Yes, so this would not be an administrative function.
Pretty soon.
Got it. Okay. I appreciate that. I did not understand that it was going to come back, and my concern was that things in the shadows go on forever, but that is sufficient for my support, so thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, we anticipate if there is need and we have requests, doing this on a quarterly basis. So the next approximate time that you would see us on this topic is sometime in June.
Okay. Reluctant, but accepting.
Your Honor, would you accept a motion to approve Resolution 29, Series 2022? This is 28, sorry.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for resolution number 28. Is there any further discussion?
I just love when you say Your Honor.
I just have one brief
Yes,
comment.
go right ahead.
I regret that we're approving fee and lieu, but I don't see that there's any option. And by the conversation at this table, we are very interested in looking for alternatives to that in the policy discussions upcoming.
Understood.
Mr. Mayor, I request after the vote that there be a summary of what's being requested of staff on the broader policy issue. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Can we have a roll call vote for Resolution 28, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau.
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Requests of staff, not a whole bunch.
Just to clarify, as I understand, we're looking at the housing credits program anyhow, and we were looking at the one question for sure has been forward of the city being able to participate in that program, buying them. I'm asking that we consider looking at what would be the pros and cons of the city also being allowed to sell credits if we so choose in that new policy. And I am looking to see if there are ways the new policy can be crafted so that the credit programs, as they approve, actually begin to house people in a more reasonable length of time. It just, you know, we don't have a limit of the amount of credits we would give, so nobody, it's not like there's a competition for those credits. But I don't know, again, it seems like it's a very specialized program. It's not the same as the vesting of a single-family home. And it seems that we could make some sort of requirements on them, but I'd like you to look at the pros and cons of that.
Understood.
To summarize I would like the policy discussions around how we can encourage housing credits, including the city buying housing credits. And I think we need to revisit what the value is for cash in lieu to continue to adjust that as the market and construction rates increase.
I think that was all.
Well, I guess I'm just not super clear. I understand what you're asking us to look at, but are you suggesting that we should kind of, batch that in with the sort of first round of work in the more? I just want to understand how this relates time-wise to what we're doing.
I do not know where ComDev is on the housing credits program review. We just did a STR review last week, I believe, and gave a lot of feedback back and forth. If this is going to blow this out of the water, please let me know, and we won't have to do it. I would ask the questions when they bring their work to me later, and then ask that it be looked at. But if this is too much of a problem, it's going to slow down the work on the moratorium, forget about it.
Our anticipation would be this would be work that would be conducted after the moratorium. It would be in conflict with the priority you set with that emergency resolution for us to pick this up right now. Thank you.
That's fine with me.
Got it. If it's happening afterwards, I'm comfortable looking at all the other things. And I think the thing that's most interesting to me that you talked about is sort of the pacing of delivery. And I think that will be best informed after the moratorium work, where hopefully we have more to be delivered.
Council's housing goal is clear that the optimization of the credits program is an important element of that. And there may be aspects of moratorium work that touch on some of these topics, but this is absolutely related to Council's housing goal and something we will continue to work on.
Cool. And
Thanks.
Rachel, I'd love to just connect offline on the sale piece, just to kind of understand your thinking better on that, because it's still not clear to me.
Okay.
The sale, you said.
Yeah, I just want to see what can happen. We have 310 units potentially or less coming up, and I don't think we can afford to pay for 25% of those right now.
Yeah, I'm just
And so
saying
rather than pay in lieu.
Could you guys have this discussion?
I don't know why it was asked a second time.
I just want to understand your thinking so I could support it and so we can understand something that you've just brought up for the first time. I don't know why that's received in any way.
There were three already who said, let's look at these things. I don't know why we're discussing it. I'm having to convince you that it's worth exploring.
I'm not asking.
That's all, Skippy.
It's just another form of partnership, of getting housing funds. It's just more to add to the thinking and the scope of how we think about it. That's about it. But we'll connect more offline. Thanks.
We move forward.
Thank you guys so much. Resolution number 38, Series 2022, 1212 East Hopkins Avenue. This is an appeal of a denied exemption from ordinance number 27.
Mr. Mayor, I can introduce this, although I won't say much more than what you just said. This was a denial of a request for an exemption from ordinance 27, series of 2021. As such, this comes to directly to council. This is not an evidentiary hearing. This is an evaluation of the record. The record is before council at this point. A representative of the applicant is present. If he wishes to make a presentation and additional argument, that's certainly up to council to accept. A representative of the city would respond to that. And then there are proposed resolutions, two alternative resolution 38s in the packet. One upholds the decision of the ComDev director, the other reverses the decision of the ComDev director. So that is where we are right now. If you wish to invite the applicant's representatives to make a presentation, the amount of time is up to you. But the city would like an equal amount of time. And Kate Johnson will be making the presentation for the city. I believe Mr. Bryan is here for the applicant. I don't know if he wishes to make a presentation or not.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Council, you have this full explanation for the appeal of denied exemption from 27 in your packet, but the applicant representative is here, so I'm going to open it up to him. If he'd like to give us a brief summary, that's up to him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff. Hi. We are here on an appeal which is authorized by Ordinance 27. And this particular applicant had everything ready to go, was waiting on city staff to get back to him and his team. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on professional fees, including architects, land planners, attorneys, had an arduous process, and I understand that it's a lengthy process. He was waiting on receiving from the city a resolution of something that two departments in the city had disagreed on. And this went back to the fall. This was long before the moratorium was anticipated. It was certainly before the moratorium was introduced and enacted. And there's a timeline. I'm sure you've all read my document. It's at the very end of the almost 1,000-page record that you have before you. I had a January 21 letter that was the notice of appeal, but then I also had a March 4th letter that sets forth the presentation for today. Mr. Shore is on the phone or on WebEx and may want to say something, but Mr. Shore grew up here. He lived in affordable housing. He graduated from here. He is someone who wants to move back here and raise a family and have a lived-in community and be part of that lived-in community. He bought a property. He's not taking advantage of the RO, affordable housing, although he could. Instead, he's paying his own way. And he had everything ready to go and wanted to be able to get his certificate of completion, and the moratorium took that away, which means that all of the work that's been done is going to need to be redone by architects, engineers, land planners. And those sorts of costs are going to be cost prohibitive for him to do this. His partner, Cynthia, is the Aspen Education Foundation director. They have a commitment to this community. This is exactly the type of family that we think, from what we've heard from the city, that you want to be here. And why it's all the more frustrating that the moratorium and subsequent staff decisions have frustrated that actual possibility. We are simply asking for an exemption from the moratorium. It's a certificate that the ComDev director can grant. The ComDev director chose not to. The appeal process, as you set forth in your ordinance 27 on December 7th and 8th, allows for you to override that. And we set forth the legal bases for it. This is not a circumstance of someone rushing or flooding the application just to beat the moratorium. This was in the works for years before the moratorium was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. And that's important here because this shows the good faith that this applicant and his team and his family have worked on. And what we would like to see is for you to say that the ComDev director's decision denying the moratorium exemption certificate should be reversed. It'll only happen for this project. This does not create any undue precedent. This does not harm anybody. All this does is allow this applicant who's bought the property, has a team in line, has a construction timeline in place, to be able to go forward with the project and not have to wait until, presumably, if the moratorium goes through June 8th, not have to wait for new rules under the land use code, and then have to go back with his team and start from scratch. Because all the calculations will change, as you know. The current application, which was submitted mere days after the moratorium, and it was ready to submit before the moratorium. That's very important for you to understand here. And the only reason it wasn't is because we were waiting for engineering and parks and some other departments to work out some issues that they didn't agree on. That's important for you to keep in mind because this is a good faith applicant that through no fault of his own got ensnared in a very fast-moving moratorium process. The reason you have the appeal section in your ordinance, presumably, is to make exceptions like this one. This is one you should consider. This doesn't harm anyone. This is not going to be used for short-term rentals. This is not going to be a second home. This is going to be a home for this family, a native of this town, someone that's raised here, that taught skiing here, whose daughter wants to be on the ski team here, whose partner is the driving force behind our Aspen Education Foundation. This is the family that asks you for relief under the appeal procedure that you've outlined is available. If Mr. Shore wants to speak, I think he should be entitled to.
I would just emphasize this is not an evidentiary hearing. This is a determination of the record. Ms. Johnson is here to address some of Mr. Bryan's comments, but it's not a public hearing and it's not an evidentiary hearing. So I'm not sure what the point of Mr. Shore's testimony would be.
I'm not trying to adduce any evidence, but I do think that Mr. Shore does deserve to be heard by the city council on this issue.
If he's not presenting evidence,
Thanks.
I'm not sure what he would be talking about, but it's up to you.
Thanks. If you don't have any objection based on any, okay. Council, I'm going to allow Mr. Shore to address council. Mr. Shore.
I'm
not sure if he has to be unmuted.
Well, if he wants to be heard.
Well, I'm getting a text message that it's not letting us, it says it's not letting him speak. There he is.
Was it the star 69 or star something?
Looks like it worked.
Off. So was Jill's.
Jimmy Cohen.
Yep, we can hear you, Mr. Shore.
Yep, we got you.
You got me? Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Mayor Tory and council members. Cynthia sitting here. You know, this is something that we worked on. We did it in all the right ways. As Chris said, I was born and raised in Aspen. Rachel, I was your neighbor growing up at Hunter Creek. And Cynthia and I have given back to this community for years. We hired all local architects and consultants. We did not jam this through the planning department. We let them take their time, a year prior to this, we went through this. There's an issue between the parks and the engineering, and I'm not an expert on this, but I relied on us doing this in a way that didn't offend with a community that I knew I would run into every day and have for 50 years. And only when we heard that this and some other mitigation efforts were coming down within, months or weeks, and it was sitting there, did we start to push. And it was very evident that it wasn't being processed through in a timely manner. And we turned ours in literally days after this went through. And I, more than anyone, and I think Cynthia would concur in lots of ways, we hear you on the community. Like, nothing hurts me more and makes me more sad to see what's happening to this community. But I don't think we're the people that you want to push out of this community. I think we're the kind of people that you keep in this community, and all we're trying to do is do it the right way. And I ask you for your support in granting this this appeal, this exemption.
Thank you.
We just received a letter from Jill Shore through Nicole, and she references something I said being wrong. And I just want to clarify, any comment I made about a higher purchase price was from sitting on the housing credits that we were discussing at the prior meeting. I haven't said anything about this application or anything at this point. So, Jill, I appreciate you emailing us, but any comment I made about higher prices 10 or 20 years from now was related to the housing credit program we were discussing with the prior item. I have not said anything about this item at all. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, and I received it from Jill and also sent it over to Nicole for the record, so it is in the record. Council, do you care to hear from staff? Do we have questions of staff at this time?
Staff is prepared to make a brief response to Mr. Bryant's comment.
I'd love to hear it.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I think I have to speak into this rather closely. Thank you for your time. I'll be very short. The briefs are in the record. Both sides here have made legal arguments that set forth the code sections that are relevant to your considerations and the facts in the record that we feel support our positions in this case. I just want to remind council that you can either affirm the director's decision, which was to deny an exemption from Ordinance 27 for this particular application. The basis for that decision was it did not fit with any of the exemption standards set forth in your ordinance. The ordinance speaks for itself. You should apply the language as written. To reverse or modify this decision, which you're allowed to do, you would need to find that the director either denied this applicant due process, meaning that it didn't afford it rights authorized by the code, the charter, or state law, or that the director exceeded his jurisdiction, i.e. acted outside of the authority this ordinance granted him, or abused his discretion. And both arguments set forth what that means. Courts across the state, including the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, have interpreted that language. And essentially, you would need to find that there is no evidence in this record to support the director's decision. I think the record is fairly straightforward. We agree on many of the facts, primarily that the application in this case was submitted after passage of Ordinance 27, and therefore also does not meet any of the exemption qualifications that you set forth in the ordinance. For those reasons, I would ask that you affirm the director's decision. And I understand, and I want to be clear here, nobody's asserting that Mr. Shore acted in bad faith or is trying to skirt the rules. I don't think that's been claimed by any but I want to just explain that there were many applicants in very similar positions as the Shores. They were planning developments. They had invested lots of money in planning these developments. And I think to expand the ordinance in this case, or to read into the ordinance language that is not there, would disadvantage other citizens that have been affected by this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Questions here? Ward?
Well, I'm basing my, my conclusion determination solely upon a duly enacted legislation of Ordinance 27 and based just upon what the exemptions are. And the only one that I see could possibly be an exemption is that demolition or repair of a non-inhabitable structure, but the applicant or the person that's bringing this before us has indicated that it is it's occupied and it's under lease until October of 2022. I don't think that there was a denial of due process. The fact that we're here, I think, indicates to me that there was a due process. I don't think there was an abuse of discretion, and I don't think it's an excess of jurisdiction. So by the terms of the Ordinance 27, I feel that the decision of the Director of ComDev should be upheld.
Thanks, Ward. Skippy?
I just had one question. Chris talked about if we were to reverse this decision, that would not set any precedent in any way. And Kate, I would like your opinion on if that is an accurate statement, and why or why not.
Well, I think certainly it would open the door to potentially people that want to that would try then to submit an application and then seek the appeals process once that application is denied as not being exempt pursuant to the ordinance and the plain meaning of the ordinance. And so I don't necessarily agree that it wouldn't create a precedent. I think you would be opening the door to individuals because you've sent a message that the ordinance exemptions are open for interpretation, if that makes sense.
Got it. It does. Thank you.
Skippy, may I respond to that?
Sure.
I don't think it creates a precedent because there are no other facts like this one. This is a unique situation where everything was ready to go except we were waiting on staff in the fall to get back about a relatively minor issue, but an issue that needed to be resolved before the application could be fully submitted and therefore get a certificate of completion. Now, I understand City Hall was in transit. There were holidays. Staff has other demands. But this went on for months. And so had that answer been given, this application would have been fully submitted before the moratorium was even considered, before it was even drafted. So that is the distinguishing characteristic of why it does not create a precedent. Anybody else that Ms. Johnson thinks this opens the door to doesn't have those facts. They don't have those same circumstances. And they also haven't submitted an application within days of the moratoriums going into effect. That is one of the key distinctions here. And that's why I think you were well within your grounds to overturn the ComDev director's decision. He did abuse his discretion. He had discretion. And he chose not to, based on these unique facts of these delays being caused, and without causing any recrimination and not pointing any fingers, it just simply was that the city delays were the reason this application was not submitted before December 8th. And based on that, I think a exemption certificate would be appropriate. And you won't be opening the floodgates. You'll be helping Mr. Shore. That's all.
Thank you. John?
I read with great interest this whole 959-page packet we were presented with today. And I just want to point out, I had a lot of questions actually about this, but I'm going to just point to one. It was mentioned that the city may have intentionally dragged its feet. Okay, it's pretty well known to anyone that lives around here that the permitting process with our city takes a lot of time. We were also dealing with COVID, moving the city offices, thanks for mentioning that, the holidays, and staff shortages. And why do we have staff shortages? Because we can't house staff. So,
Well, and I can respond to that too, because in that circumstance, that's all the more reason if we need to make allowances for those things, shouldn't we also make allowance for the applicant? If you're going to make allowance for city staff in that regard, so too shouldn't the applicant have the same kind of benefit here?
don't misunderstand what I'm saying. All I'm trying to point out is it's well known that the permitting process takes a lot of time, and our staff was understaffed and dealing with a lot of outside issues. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Thanks. Rachel.
Yeah, my first term on council was with Frank Peters, who many people in this community know, and he was a great leader. And he said he was not running for a second term, and so I only really got to serve with him for 2 years. And I was like, well, Frank, why aren't you going to run for a second term? You're really good at this. We'd love your leadership. And the one thing he had said is, you get to where you feel like you've had to say no to everybody you've ever worked with and everyone you've ever seen, and that's hard to carry around. And I'm going to be the first to agree with this. It is hard to say no to people you know, and people who've been neighbors. And I will also pull up something I have heard from this gentleman here, that you need to listen to the facts, not the story. What are the facts? And this is a hearing about the facts. It's literally, I hate to have to put it this way, but it's not about the people. It's not about the players. It's about the facts. And this request for an exemption and to move forward does not fit the ordinance. It does not fit the exemptions that sit there. It's easy enough to say that it is or isn't precedent setting, but I really can imagine people coming in to say, well, if I had known you were going to hear applications that had come in 7 days after the deadline, I would have submitted, and who have other sets of facts. And to say, I didn't realize the door was open that much, and I should have put mine in, and I do see this as precedent setting at some level. And I'll be the first to say this is extremely painful. It's a painful vote I'm going to have to take, and it's a painful vote that our council knew we were taking as we each decided and thought individually about whether a moratorium was the only way to address our code changes as necessary. That wasn't going to be necessarily well received by all, or that it was going to be without, challenges in the development community. So I agree with Ward. I'm not seeing any reasons for overturning the community director's decision on this. I would affirm it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Further questions, comments?
Comments?
Sure.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing this forward, Chris, and I appreciate hearing from you, Noah, and Jill, and I share your assertion that you are the type of family that we are trying to serve, and we are trying to be a more full, lived-in community. And unfortunately, when I am looking at the criteria on which we're determining tonight, I can't find that any of these three things are done. What I can say, which I think should matter, is we're halfway through this moratorium already. We intend to finish on time. And though, Chris, you made assertions that all of the work will need to be redone, that's based on assumption. It's not based on fact. It may or may not. And I have seen nothing to date in the work that we're doing that makes me feel as though the outcome of this will be harmful. And so hopefully this is a pause more than anything. And we look forward to having you in the community in this home when the time is right. But at this time, based on the criteria in front of us, I can't find to overturn this.
Would you accept a motion, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I would make a motion to approve the first resolution, number 38, which reads, a resolution of the Aspen City Council affirming a decision of the Community Development Director.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? I'll share my view on this real quickly. I do know the Shore family and have known them for a long time. I completely respect and appreciate them in our community and Noah's growing up here and his desire to return. This decision is not based upon that. It is based upon our findings and how our staff handles the situation and whether this conforms to deserve an exemption from ordinance number 27. In this case, I do not find an absence of due process, and I do not find an abuse of power and discretion. So I as well am going to vote to uphold Community Development Director's decision. With that, we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Can we have a roll call vote for Resolution 28, which is made in the affirmative to uphold the Community Development Director's decision?
Excuse me, did you say 28, 38?
I'm sorry, 38. We each had one.
Yeah.
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Chris.
Break
Thank you.
time?
Sorry.
Is it time for a break? 7:17?
We can do better than a break here.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I second.
No, we can't adjourn. Don't we have a special, oh, that was the wrong agenda I was looking at.
Yesterday.
This thing will flip over to another one sometime.
Eat and leave.
Yeah, I'll take a motion.
Hopefully.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. Is there any further comments this evening? Could we have a roll call vote for adjournment, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Oh, good, okay.
We are
Thanks,
adjourned.
y'all.
Thank you.
You scared me, Rachel.